Okay. Small observatories. Somebody was asking me about this, like why have I got a slide on the front here which doesn't have an observatory? You're going to see the observatory he ends up with. But he has two, actually. This is Greg Bach. He's one of the 6-man BOSS supernova search team, which very successfully discovers on a regular basis supernovas. They're down in New Zealand and Australia. This is his sun deck in Queensland. That's why there's palm trees back there. So, did we start the camera? Okay. All right. So, come on. There. Last June, I was at the General Assembly in Victoria. And if you've been to Victoria, you'll know in Saanich, just outside, you'll find this observatory, DAO. And that's houses the Plaskett telescope, which is built back in 1930. So this is me on the back side, that's the front side with a fancy entrance there. This is the telescope on the inside. I put an inset with me here so you can see how big this thing is. It's about as wide as I am tall, 6-foot mirror. And it dates back to, there we go again. Oh, it's stuck. There.
What's wrong? Can you just...
There we go. To this period, Percival Lovell was the astronomer who discovered what was the planet Pluto, no longer. And it goes back to a period when they did a lot of visual observing, and photography was done with photographic plates and so on. But it's still in use. It's been refurbished. The original mirror's in the museum. They put a new mirror in there. They're still using the thing. It's good. When we were at that same conference, we were at the University of Victoria, and this is the University of Victoria's telescope here. You can see a person here standing there, a little reflective stripe on his jacket gives you an idea how big this telescope is. Fairly big telescope, much more modern, of course. There's the control center for it. Really fancy equipment. Here's another one. I was talking to Dr. Paul Hickson a few weeks ago, and 100 years ago, somebody figured out that you could make a mirror for a telescope using liquid mercury. Now, they did it on a metal plate. This is liquid mercury, and it's on a cushion of air. And what they do to curve the mirror is they spin it. And this thing, this is a 6-meter mirror. This is huge. Why did he do this? Because you build a 6-meter mirror out of glass or ceramic or whatever, it's going to cost you billions. This is $500,000, the whole project. That's why he wanted to do that. And he's actually agreed to give me a tour of this thing. We'll probably use it in a television series next spring. This is their control center. You can see it's up in Maple Ridge in the research forest. And there's the lower mainland, there's that lake pollution, sky glare, bleh. It's not the greatest place. Now, if you go to Wikipedia and you say large telescopes, they'll tell you by their standards, 44 large telescopes in the world. That's not what I came to talk to you here about tonight. This is what I came to talk about. These guys. This is Stan. Ray Stan from the Meadowview Observatory in California and his grandchildren there. Little observatories. And when I was at that conference last June, during the annual general meeting, one of the vice presidents announced that they wanted someone to write a book on small observatories. There was 4 different projects they announced, but this is one of them. And then the very first break after that, I went up and I poked him in the chest and I said, Colin, I want that. That one. I'm going to do that. So what I've been doing for the last several months is talking to observatory owners all over the world. And I've had 122 that I've spoken to so far. 92 of them have completed questionnaires for me, and 32 of them, most of them, I've been on Skype with them, like a video conference, but I've had a few phone conferences and have actually spoken to a few people face to face. And from these countries, they told me they wanted Canadian content in the book, and there will be. But I said, you know what, Colin, I'm talking to people who've got these things wherever I can find them, because everyone's got ideas. So here we go, just to give you an idea. Here's Nikolaos in Greece. That's a nice little roll-off roof observatory. Dr. Pedro Rey in Portugal, that's his rig there. He's actually a biologist, not an astronomer other than an amateur. And this is Mervyn Millward's 2 observatories down in Tasmania, which a few years ago were hit by lightning. Well, actually the lightning hit the power transformer about a half mile away and fried everything. He had insurance, happy to say. So one of the things I asked people was, how many observatories have you built? And slightly over half have only built 1. But then another 26% have built 2, and then there's some people, 17% they've built like 3 or more. And there's a reason for this. Some of them, well, you just saw Mervyn Mill where he deliberately built 2 because he does science with his, and he wanted like multiple telescopes. But often it comes down to this. Now, some of the older people in the room who have been in the astronomy community for a while will know exactly what I'm talking about here, and I'm not looking at anyone in particular. But what this means is a person who buys a great big light bucket of a telescope, and as soon as he's got it, he's looking for the next biggest size. He wants an even bigger one. It's about guys that have a problem with, big telescope. And the problem with this is, if you get a telescope, and most people buy the telescope and then build the observatory, but then you decide you want a bigger one, it may not fit into the existing observatory. So the guy in the cover slide there, Greg Bach, when we were having our conversation on Skype, he said, you know what? People need to ask themselves a simple question. What do I want to use this for? Because if you can't answer that, why are you even building it? But once you've answered that, the next question you have to ask is, what do I want it for in 10 years from now? Because you might want to upgrade. And maybe you're not getting a bigger telescope, but if you start hanging things like cameras and stuff off of it, that does make it bigger and heavier, and that will make a difference too. And one of the other things that can happen is you can go into this, this is going to be my hobby, I'm going out to my observatory now, and the next thing you know, the whole family's out there, and you need room for all of them too. So you need to think about these things. This is part of the reason I was writing this book, was to give people ideas about what they needed to think about to create this. Because it's much better to build one than to keep ripping them down and building a new one. And this is especially true of an observatory with a dome like you saw in the beginning, because the dome has this opening, this aperture, the shutter. And the telescope looks through that. And the dome either has to turn with the telescope, or as that telescope moves, every so often someone's got to go out and crank it around and move it. And if it isn't a very big aperture and the telescope's very wide, you're doing that pretty often. Don't want that. So these are the typical sizes, the most common sizes of telescopes you find in small observatories. Just in case you were wondering.
What size is the one at your observatory?
The one at our observatory is a 14-inch. So it's down here, 21%. Okay, I asked them, do you consider yourself an amateur or professional? Now you look at the kind of stuff that the people do with this, and the advanced technology that they are on a daily basis operating with, and you say, you know what, like what would it take to call you a professional? And most of them would say, pay me. No. But yeah, 92% of the people I spoke to, even if they have doctor in front of their name and a whole bunch of letters afterwards, don't consider themselves anything more than an amateur astronomer. And why did they build it? The most prominent, the most common reason that people give for building an observatory is, I'm sick and tired of setting up a telescope, setting up the alignments, getting everything ready to go in the clouds in the day. Take the telescope down, put it, like it's an awful lot of work, especially if you've got all of this equipment. You've got cameras, and mounts, and telescope, computers and everything else. It takes a long time to set up and take down. And quite frankly, a lot of people have said, you know what, I just want to leave it set up. Some said, I'm getting older, it's getting harder to put up and take down. The other major reason people gave was I want to do serious astrophotography and I want it set up so that it's much easier to use and I can get at my stuff faster. So there were other reasons. Some people said this has been on my bucket list. It was a challenge. You know, there were all kinds of other reasons, but these were the two most common ones. The light bucket list. There you go. And most people who do this actually either were members of a club or are members of a club. And the reason for that is there are very often people in the club that can help them build it, that have knowledge about what they need to do to make this thing work. There are several owners of observatories within our club. So it's a support network for people. Where did you build it? Most people at home. This is one of our members' observatories. Erwin's not here tonight. I haven't seen him. This is Erwin Diener's observatory down at Roberts Creek. That's his dome up there on the roof. And, okay, so people typically build them at home, but what really surprised me is I said, okay, why did you build it there? Only 36% say they built it there because it was a dark sky place. Now, if you're going to buy property and you're not concerned about astronomy at all, and you're looking for the commute, and am I close to the school, where's the grocery store, you know, stuff like that. But if you're interested specifically in doing astronomy, you might also be thinking, well, another thing I might want is dark sky. But it comes down to what people's financial, you know, ability is, and awful lot of people found that what they'd have to do is just make do with what they have. And so, remember the guy in the cover slide? That's him right there. And he just bought himself a sky shed pod, and that's the same deck and the same palm trees back there, and he's now putting up his observatory, you see. He has another one elsewhere, you're going to see later, but the reason they built there was I own the property already. So I'll make do with what I've got. Now, I said, okay, so you make do with what you got. Would you consider the site that you ended up with dark sky? 56%, yeah. Yeah, it's dark enough, it's good. But unfortunately, 21% said it's deteriorating. You know, the urban sprawl is closing in on me. The airport is starting to route flights overhead or whatever. And it's starting to ruin my viewing experience, unfortunately. So that's one of the reasons that we're very interested in light pollution abatement and that sort of thing, because it not only affects environmental concerns and waste energy, but you know, somebody spends an awful lot of money and time and effort making this work, and then this happens. So this is a couple of little observatory pods that are owned by Kunihiko Kano, who is the president of the Japanese Astrophotography Association. And this balcony is in downtown Tokyo. And I can't think of a place that's more light polluted than that. I can't. And I pointed it out to him. I said, hey, Kunihiko, what? He says, well, you know, they've got really amazing technology these days. You can correct for a lot of that stuff. Well, you can. But, you know, you're never going to get a perfect result. But, I mean, people will make do with what they've got. Another thing I was asking people was, how many observatories do you have on site? Now, 74%, it's their observatory in the backyard, and that's it. But there are a lot of people who share sites. Now, this observatory here is also one of those observatories that belongs to Greg Bach on the cover slide. And this is an observatory park, and I'll come back to this later. But you're starting to see more of that. How many people design these observatories themselves? 63% actually. I know there's a lot of kits out there, things that you can, you know, buy it, follow the instructions, set it up, plug it in. But at least the people I spoke to, actually, quite a few designed them themselves. That's our Vice President, Adrian, up on the peak of our observatory when it was under construction, with a big smile on his face, this blue stick, to be working there. And another thing I wanted to know was, are your observatories manual or are they motorized? And I thought that quite a few would be motorized. Actually, more of them are manual. even if the telescope is set up, go-to tracking, everything is working automatic, is hooked up to a computer, every so often they come out and they go crank, 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 move the dome around. Unless they got a roll-off roof. And 95% are plugged in to the electrical power. 3 of them are operating off of electrical cords running through the backyard across the lawn. Most people, they bury the cable and so on. These are actually the solar panels that we're going to use for our observatory. We're off-grid. So we're going to be solar panels and batteries. And who built it? Actually, only 18.5% built it all by themselves. This guy is one of those crazy buggers right there, Mike Bauer in Wisconsin. And most with helpers, and this is again, why do we join an astronomy club? Helpers. Family helpers. What typically will happen with a dome is they will build a building, and what will happen is they'll need a whole bunch of people to lift the dome onto it. Because they generally buy the dome, they don't build it like the intrepid Mike Bauer here. Because that's difficult. Who built the stuff inside? Actually, lots of people tinker and build accessories and stuff for their observatories. That's pretty fun. And the telescope, did you buy it or did you build it? Most people, 88%, will buy the telescope for the observatory. And I put a little arrow here, and you probably can't read that, but it says, warning, objects in telescope appear farther away than they are. Smart ass. Right. And was it built for the existing telescope? Yeah, 77% had the telescope before they had the observatory. This is ours. Somebody was asking a moment ago, how big is our telescope? There it is. There's our past presidents, Mike and Bill, there playing with it on the day that we first unpacked it from its box. That's what we're going to have in the observatory. Now, one of the best questions I asked people were, did anything go wrong? What went right? What would you do different next time? And only 11% of the people I spoke to said nothing went wrong. And then when I actually interviewed some of these people on Skype or the phone, you found out that they weren't quite. There's always something. Because this one is in Arizona, and what happened is they put in their underground wiring system, and it's filled up with water. It's not good. Very bad. And I asked people, do you have a go-to mount, like a motorized mount, or is it a push tube where you just manually do it? And surprisingly enough, 5% of the people with observatories manually operate the telescope. There's nothing plugged in at all. There are quite a few people who actually still do just visual viewing, and it's just that they didn't want to keep setting things up, putting it away again at the end of the night. That's cool. Remote viewing, 65% of the people who build these little observatories operate them remotely, but about 95% of those are in their office and their observatories in the backyard. It's not like it's miles away. There's a Ethernet cable that goes out to the observatory. It's just, it's a lot more comfortable inside operating it from there. Now, a lot of these people, they'll put a warm room on the somewhere around the observatory so that they are not in that cold room the telescope is. And if you're doing a long session, that can be a very important thing. But that 5%, these are the guys that are operating the observatory from 125 miles away. Paul Hickson, who had that liquid mercury telescope that I showed you earlier, has one down in Chile. He sits in his office at UBC and runs it on a mountaintop in Chile. You can do it from a long ways off, but there's all kinds of other considerations, because if the power goes out and you're here and that's Chile, you better hope there's somebody there that can close the roof before the rain gets there. You're going to have a problem.
Is that 65% of all observatories?
All of the observatory.
All imaging observatories?
All observatories. All of the people that I interviewed.
Do you remember what the ratio was between imagers and observers? I can't remember.
I could look it up for you. I could, because I have.
I thought maybe it was on an early slide.
I don't think so, but I could.
It did say 31% did it for astrophotography.
Well, I can. That's the next slide actually. Ask people, what do you actually do? Now, this does not add up to 100 because they overlap. Some people do both. Okay, but 30% of the people do visual, whether they do other stuff as well. a large number do astrophotography, 46% they do science. And we can talk about the kind of science in a moment. This is a real typical roll-off roof observatory where the roof is there and they have a panel that folds down here to give themselves more of a horizon to look at. We'll show you some examples of that later. This is the boss team that I was talking about earlier. These are the guys. This is Craig Bott up here. And they're very successful searching for supernovas. They have a lot of fun with that. They all have observatories. Public or private, interesting thing. 70% of the people I spoke to operate these things for themselves. They don't, I mean, their wife or their kids or family might show up for viewing sessions, but primarily it's for them, for John here. This is his sky shed pod, and it's for him. But the interesting thing was I found a lot of people started in astronomy by going to star parties and to events like this, and they enjoyed the social stuff, and then they built the observatory, and the next thing you know, they're sitting in the observatory all by themselves. Anyway, something's missing. And so what they often did is they kept a telescope, or they got a telescope that they could take to star parties or to go to events, so they could do a certain amount of social stuff as well as this, and I bet while they're at those events, they're remotely operating their other observatory from there, because you can do that. But the other thing that happened was people meant to do it solely by themselves. And if you talk to people like Frank Walsh from Cosmic Obsessions Observatory down in Texas, next thing you know, there's 3 generations of family in there, and they've got 5 of the things, so like it can go either way. This observatory you'll see from a distance in a moment. So what kind of observatories do people build? 80% of them are either domes or roll-off roofs. Those are the most common types. And it's an even split. It's like 50-50 for those. Then there's a 21% that are all these other little weird variations. I'll show you some of those in a minute. But we'll talk about domes first. A lot of people, they think of domes right off the bat because you saw those big domes in the beginning. I mean, that's a classic observatory. That's the way they used to look like. I mean, they don't make observatories to look like domes all the time anymore. There are other shapes you can use, as you'll find out. But this is really common. You've got the aperture here. The telescope's turned sideways here. But I mean, you've got this gives you a certain amount of protection from wind and weather and that sort of thing. But again, you've got to have it so the dome rotates so it lines up with the telescope. And if that aperture is small, then you're going to be pretty regularly moving the thing. Has anyone here been to the Southern McNaught Observatory down by the planetarium in Vancouver? Yeah, that's manual. Well, that's a motorized roof, but it doesn't track. The telescope does, but every so often they get one of the kids to go and move the roof. Of course, they got lots of kids as volunteers to do that. But yeah, the dome doesn't track. Some of the people I spoke to, like Keith here, started in an age where they had to build everything. And this guy, quite literally, he fabricated the fiberglass wedges for the roof and the shutter. He built all of this, the pier. He even built the telescope, everything. It's like Paul Hickson with his liquid mercury telescope. He's one of these guys that he needs to switch from, he doesn't go to Home Depot. He figures I can build a better one than that. So he just goes ahead and does it. On the other extreme, remember the man and his wife and the little dome? There it is. It's a kit. You can build this thing in an afternoon. Sky shed pod. It's a dome that rotates, but this half of the dome folds into the other half, and you get this big wedge of sky that you can look through. You even have portable ones. This is Astro Gizmos, and they build this thing called the Astro Gazer, and the object of the exercise with this is to build a dome with a cover that you could take down into 2 40-pound roller bags and 1 50-pound roller bag and take to star parties. But they found, since they started manufacturing these things, that people are putting them in their backyards and they're permanent. And he tells me that if you do this properly, you put a pad down and you lock it down, this will survive like a 90-mile-per-hour wind. I'm not so sure, but most of the time, if you're talking about people with domes, you'll look at something like this. They have a little shed, and they have a dome on the top. and they have a little door. Now, I'm going to show you a guy standing next to one of these. These are both from the same Midas Observatory group in Halifax. They're with the Halifax Center of the RASC. And Alex here, you see that the door is not as high as he is. And the reason for this is we want the telescope to look over the top of the wall down to the horizon, because not in that direction obviously, but in the other direction probably he can get a view right down to the horizon, and that's what he wants. But the trouble with that is the wall's down here and the door's down here, and you're bashing your head all the time trying to get into the thing. So there are all kinds of ways to get around this, and I'll show you a couple. But this is a very common thing, a very common pattern. And the building they build themselves, and the dome they get from like Home in a Dome or whoever. Here's another one on the back deck. P. Peterson in Rhode Island. That's actually his second one. And Ed Madged in Courtney, BC. Anyone know it? Now the reason I put an arrow in there is this is one of the problems that you have. You're putting a round dome on a flat roof. And what happens is water goes. You can see how he's done a lot of goop and stuff around here to try and keep the water out. You probably want to do something more like this. Travis Smith in Dry Creek, Utah. And here he's got an angled roof. The water rolls away from the dome. And he's also got his warm room, and he's also got a door in there because it's his work shed where he built his telescopes. And, yeah, it's a nice little setup there. Here's another one. Jerry, what he did is he put his warm room down here, and his telescope, he raised it up so you can walk in without bumping your head. The telescope's way up there, looks over the rooftops. And you just have to get up on a little platform to work with the telescope.
So that's pretty tall, is that right?
Yeah, well this is ridiculously tall. This is Richard here.
Oh my God.
Wow.
Look at that thing. And like, this is the period. This is one of the problems with observatories is you have to have a good pier. Because the pier has to have a lot of weight on the other end, and that weight isn't hopefully going to tip the thing over or wrench it out of its foundation on the ground, which is hard to do with something this long. But also, you don't want it to vibrate, okay? Because if it vibrates, it's going to ruin a long session that you're doing for astrophotography where you're trying to have a nice still picture. So what you will try to do is have a pier which is separate from the floor. This is what we have with our observatory up in Wilson Creek. There's a great big concrete pillar that comes up through the floor, and then there's a metal pier, and there is a gap which is filled with, you can fill it with steel wool or foam or any number of things, but when people are walking on the floor in the observatory, the vibrations don't translate to the telescope. We actually also we're building a second pier on the deck outside, so if someone wants to set up another telescope out there, it will work for them a little better. Here's another way to get in without bumping your head. You line it up so that the aperture is opposite the door. And you walk in, and you turn it in whatever direction you want. It's called the Pinhead Observatory. Actually, this is Pinhead 2. Because his original dome, he thought, I know, I'll make it out of styrofoam. And it worked. He made this kind of geodesic pattern of foam board and glued it all together, and he got a dome. But the trouble with that is, if you don't cover it with some fiberglass or some sort of protective material, crows show up and start picking holes in it. So we ended up with a dome which is covered with all these little spike panels. Hence Pinhead. Yeah. Who here knows Jack Newton? Yeah. This is Jack Newton, who is like, he's built 10 observatories as he moved across Canada in various different jobs. He's been on the CBC. They've interviewed him about his astronomy and astrophotography and the telescopes he's built. And he's now moved to Osoyoos, where he has got his bed and breakfast with his dome right there, and it's wonderful. You know, we have several of our members have gone there, and it's really neat. If you are looking for an interesting holiday, this is a good one to try. But here's a warning, okay? If you want to do something like this and build a dome on your house, or like Irwin did with his down in Roberts Creek, If you build the dome over the roof, like you put a deck over top of the roof and you build your observatory, okay, it's separate. But if you build it into the house, the roofing material has to make the same code as the roofing material of the house. So that might mean that the dome material that you've got might not meet the standards unless you treat it with special materials or whatever. So it's nice, you can just walk into his observatory from, you know, the house. The other problem is the heat of the house has to be well insulated from that observatory, otherwise you get these warm currents coming up in front of your telescope and it'll make for a bad viewing season. Now here, this is Mardina Clark, White Peak Observatory in Tacoma, Washington. It looks like a shed. You can actually just see it right top there, the top of the shutter. Okay? It is actually a dome. It doesn't have to be hemispherical. It just has to turn, and hers does, of course. There you go. You can see there's your telescope. So, you know, it can be a cube, it can be an octagon, it can be just about any shape you want. If it's got a shutter and it turns, they call it a dome. But as you can see, that's a pretty simple structure. A lot easier to build than some of these domes. So the other one that's really common is a roll-off roof. And there it is again, roll-off panel folds down so you can see that horizon, right? Without having to raise the telescope up. Pretty common thing. Here's a small, remember that one with a sign on it that said warning objects appear further away? This is the one. This is his simple observatory. You can see the telescope just peeking up over the roof. Now, in this case, he's got trees and stuff around him, so he hasn't tried to make a low wall, so he's got a doorway you can walk straight in. There's another very common one from England there with a roll-off, and that's just a garden shed that's been converted. Ridiculously easy to do, except if you don't rig this so that it is locked into the rails, strong wind comes along, there goes your roof. That's the thing you have to be careful of with roll-off roofs. Here's the doghouse observatory. There's the dog. Looks like a backyard, I don't know, little cottage or something. It's another one of the Minus Observatory groups ones. Roll-off roof. You see they've got a little panel here to give clearance to get it over top of the telescope. One of the things that you have to be very careful of with these kind of observatories, if you're operating them really remotely from hundreds of miles away, is if something goes wrong, this thing has to be programmed so it goes, oh, power's out, give it 5 minutes, no good, start a close sequence, and part of the close sequence has to be get the telescope out of the way of the roof, or have the roof rigged so that it can go over the top of the telescope without hitting it. Otherwise, you've got a problem. This is the Naperville Astro Association's roll-off, and here again you see the big panel folds down to give them the horizon. But this is an angled roof, a flat roof that's angled and it rolls down. This is motorized because that's heavy, and they need a pretty good winch to get that thing back up again. Now this, no, I'm not going to do that. So what I'm going to do is momentarily get out of here and go to here and play this for you so you can see the typical roll-off. This is in Calgary. This is a split roll-off, so you got two little pieces that go in different directions, and then there comes the telescope.
Must be cool just to watch that happen.
There you go. And point at the sky. And this guy does some serious astrophotography.
Yeah, right.
Yes, he does.
So how many people like want some sort of the personal protection from the elements rather than just protecting the telescope from the elements?
Quite a few people, especially as they get towards my age, start saying, you know what, I'm tired of sitting out here in a stool in the cold. I'm going to sit in a warm room with some nice music and a fridge and, you know.
Yeah.
And and control it from a comfortable place. And in some cases what it was the wife saying, oh, he's spending all that time out there in the observatory and, you know, family never sees you. So you can like be in there with the family doing things and we so often go, good.
For astrophotography too, you use long exposures.
You use long
You
exposure.
take lots of them. So
Yes,
can
you do.
Leave the roof open for hours and there's nothing to do.
There's
Look through the telescope.
nothing to do. So there it goes down again.
Isn't that why you have to do it?
Yes, okay, back to the show. So, yeah, go away. I had this ring so you could click on that and play it, and there was, it didn't like the format, so yes, I want to play that. This one I want to play. It's going to play for me, because it was a video of our observatory opening. It doesn't work, it wants to do that. Okay. So this is Greg Bach's observatory out in the outback that he does his stuff. And he controls this one from Queensland, but this is like an hour's drive away. And this is fully remote like the one you just saw. If there is a problem, then it will automatically close up.
Is that metal side?
That's metal side.
So
Moisture issues?
He doesn't there.
Oh.
Actually, the majority of the people that I spoke to, I asked them, do you use dehumidifiers and this sort of thing? Most don't. Some do, but
Probably drier than
yeah, this is the outback.
Yep.
It's on a metal shed here.
Here's your observatory, Mike. This is Mike's observatory down at Roberts Creek. It's a flip top. You can see that the two halves flop open. This is like, he doesn't need any more sky than that because he's completely surrounded by these towering Douglas firs. So all you can see is about this much sky straight up. So we just sort of, most people sit there for a long time because they're having long exposures. He's sitting there to wait for the sky to turn overhead so we can see something.
It's the best part of this guy.
He should get one of
No,
those.
it's a beautiful observatory. It's a great example. And these panels here, he actually got from a sign shop. It's aluminum sandwiched over polystyrene, isn't it? Interesting.
We tried to track them down all over North America, couldn't find them.
Yeah.
And Jason's signs had two of them just on the other side of the highway.
On the other end of the spectrum here is Rich here with his observatory in the tower, which is attached to the back of his house. There he is, way up there. Those panels weigh 200 pounds each. And he cranks those out. And like, he built it up there because I want to see over the trees, right? And he does. This is Jeff in Belgium. And
That's like a
can you see
can.
how this works? There's two arms, and the roof sort of rolls out and drops down like this.
Oh, yeah.
Thank goodness.
There you go.
So would the dome actually, does it realistically offer you more protection than something like that? Or is it
This is
just...
a debate that I don't think I'm ever going to sort out. There's very, very strong advocates of roll-offs, and there's equally strong advocates of domes. And I've lost count of the number of times I've talked to people with domes saying, damn, I wish I had a roll-off, and vice versa.
Really?
So you're never going to win that one. All I can say is, with a roll-off, you've got, if it's open, you've got the sky.
Right.
There it is, you know. With a dome, you got to have that thing pointed, but it does give you protection. If you're in an area where there's a lot of winds, it can make it a little bit more comfortable viewing, and it doesn't have winds buffeting the telescope and cause vibrations. But you know, with the other thing is, if you've got a really, really remote observatory, like you're hundreds of miles away, and something goes wrong, a dome, even if the shutter isn't closed, is more protection than a roll-off roof open. You know, but so this is a batwing style, which is the kind of style that Mike had, and I'm going to show you how this works.
Eastfield Observatory, it's like a clamshell observatory. It houses a 12.5 inch utility reflector. Very simple to open it up, takes about 2 minutes. First step is to take out the access door on the side. Which you want to
This is counterweights.
Those large cylindrical concrete weights are counterbalances. Let's move this back to the bottom. You can see the line that sits on top of the 4x4 pulse. On the south side, there are two triangular sections of wall. You get out of the way so that you can get a full rear view of the sunrise. It's also one house. This is house right there.
And here's his work page.
There's also a cable. Paralysis. There are two nylon laundry bags to protect the telescope from dust. So there's prospect. The telescope box is protected dust by primary by a large foam disc that sits in the tube, and secondary is protected by this sock plastic. Telescope is swung up in position, an eyepiece in, flip on the drives, away you go. It's that simple. Nice look.
And computer.
What kind of a scope is that?
Um,
It seems really long.
It is a Dobsonian style thing, or a
Newtonian.
Newtonian, sorry. Yeah, and that's in New England. Now you don't have to have the roof roll off. You can have the whole damn building roll off. This is what Gary Caldwell. He's with Thunder Bay, I think, Center. And you see the whole building rolls off, and there's this little thing here. You flip that up, and it slides in around the telescope, and then you close the doors.
So
And he built this in his summer place, which is right next to a dark sky reserve. So this is a really good viewing site.
Could it just become his warm room?
Yes, he does, actually. He closes the doors and it becomes a warm room too. That's exactly right. He does. You can also have an astro closet. See, there's a telescope, and this thing rolls back on these rails right here, just this little box.
Becomes an outhouse.
And it looks like
It's a reach kind telescope.
This one is one of my favorites. This is Sander Pool in Reading, Connecticut. And let me show you what happens when we open this his observatory. This is a converted garden shed. He has to put this bar in so the doors stay open. And he disappears for a moment. And it tips over. Just like that.
So instead of having to take the scope out of the house and set it up, you just take the house away from the scope.
Yeah. This is tip over observatory. So to finish up, one of the things you see an awful lot happening these days are astronomy parks. And this is where people in clubs like our own get property and then allow all kinds of people to put their observatories there and come up with various different sharing arrangements of whatever to do this. This is the one in Australia in the outback where Greg Bach has his. And one of the advantages to these things is if you're operating as remotely as some of these people are, there is somebody usually who is resident there, and if something goes wrong, he's got a key and he can go over and do something about it. This is the United Astronomy Clubs of New Jersey, and you can see they got a whole bunch of roll-off roofs there, and that big pad up there, they're building a big roll-off observatory with I think it's like a 20-inch scope for this one. Here's Sierra Remote, which is a few miles away from Yosemite National Park. A whole bunch of roll-offs. Yes. Here's Orion remote imaging. Look at that.
Those look more. Those don't look amateur grade.
These guys are pretty serious in doing science and astrophotography and stuff. But yeah.
I mean that's some serious money in that.
Oh yeah. Brian Warner. This guy actually started with his own observatory and then got together with these two other guys, and they got this piece of property in Landers, California, and they put several observatories out there, and they do supernova search and they look at near-Earth objects and all kinds of stuff and do science with it. But he operates this from Colorado, his observatory from Colorado. And one of the things you can do with a remote like that is if you're not there, you can sell time to the university, because they're always looking for time on telescopes. So, this is our observatory right here. That's the stage that it's at right now. We put the siding on a few weeks ago, and we're getting ready to do some more work on it very soon. But it's a roll-off. You can see that the roof here is going to run on the rails there. And I'll open it up so we can look at the skies. Any questions about
What kind of
small?
siding did you get?
That's hardy board, a concrete board.
Yeah,
Heavy.
horizontal.
It's heavy. Yes.
How many of these people who are operating remote sites, how secure are those sites? Vendors and things like that.
One of the advantages to these astronomy parks is you can have security. Some of them are deliberately operating them, or are deliberately operating them in state parks that have security, and they're going to share that. There's a site in Illinois, that Naperville organization, for example, where they got a deal with the city. The city has a kind of a work site where they have the water treatment and various other things happening, and they let them have free property there for their observatory, and the site has security, so they have a key to get on. It's like we have ours up at the airport, and a certain amount of security comes along with that. But one of the concerns, one of the reasons that people will build a roll-off roof or tip over or something that looks like a garden shed is it doesn't look like anything more than a garden shed. If you've got a dome in your backyard, everyone knows it's an observatory full of expensive equipment. But to look like a garden shed, well, most people won't. So that is a very good question, and it's a valid concern. I mean, I know the Prince George Center had a number of break-ins to their center and things vandalized or so on. So, and before they moved to their new site. So that is a concern. Yeah.
I guess it might be just being on their police dog cams.
And have like a little lute playing dogs growling. I like it. Yeah.
One thing about Jack Newton's place is he's got another place down in Arizona. So the winter time he goes to Arizona, and he has his guests in there in the summertime in the Soyuz, and it's cloudy. He can open his dome in Arizona, and he's got a mini theater in there with this huge screen, and he can show them the Arizona sky.
Yeah. One of the guys I spoke to, another Australian, he has an astro tourism business, and it's an even bigger operation than that. He's got like 4 piers in there, big scopes, and a big roll-off roof, and you can have like 30 people interviewing at once. Yeah. So, yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
Are any of these wired in so that somebody else remotely can just log in and have a look at what they're seeing?
I actually just yesterday put a post on the website. That social studies center that I mentioned, their students had found a link that I hadn't found yet of telescopes all over the world that are online, so you can just, or they're live and you can watch what they're doing. So check that link out. But yes, there is a capability to do that. And most of these backyard observatories are hardwired in. Very few people have a wireless link. I expected to see more people with a wireless link to the backyard observatory, but quite a few people were saying they didn't have a strong enough signal, it was intermittent, or there was various other things, and a lot of them we just felt more secure having an Ethernet cable going straight out to the observatory, and I can understand that. If you're miles and miles away, well, you know, you're going to have to operate it through a program that's going to your laptop keyboard controls the keyboard in the observatory, and about half of them, there's some really good software out there that you can get that will do that. You don't really have to figure it out for yourself, but probably about a quarter of the people I spoke to like, not good enough, I'm going to write my own program. I mean, so, but there's lots of shareware out there that allows you to do that. It's not that difficult to do. But again, if you're going to be doing it from a distance like that, one guy that I spoke to, he's regularly on the road doing business, and he's in a hotel in Pennsylvania, you know, with his laptop operating the observatory in, you know, New Mexico. So you can do it, but you have to make sure that that remote observatory is designed to shut itself down. They'll have multiple backups for power and this sort of thing on an uninterrupted power system, EBS, and that sort of thing, because that's a lot of money that you put into that equipment, and you don't want the roof to get stuck open, you know. And
did you survey people about the cost of their observatory, cost of the housing, and the cost of what was inside?
There's a pretty wide range. I mean, one of those sheds, like you saw John and his wife standing in, those sky shed pods, it's like $1,500 for the basic pod. Now he's got a max pod that he's been threatening to bring out for 2 years now. And any day now, pod max is coming out, which is even bigger than that one. And he's already got a pod extreme he's got planned. It's like a 20-foot dome, made of the same sort of materials. But I mean, you saw Sandra Poole's little tip-over shed there. I mean, you can get a good quality garden shed, and they're not that expensive, and with a little bit of tinkering, you got yourself a roll-off roof or a tip-over or whatever you like, you know. And I'm sure that the telescope and the equipment that comes along with it is more expensive than a shed that houses it, you know. But it depends on how much you want to put into it. I mean, one of the reasons that people built these things in their backyards and not in some remote site is because they didn't have enough money. They wanted to spend money on the equipment, not like being way up there. But you know, there's all kinds of different variations. And one of the reasons that this has been fun doing this is you can see all the different creative ways that people have come about putting these things together and making them work within their budget. You know, and that's one of the reasons I threw that Mercury mirror one in there, because you know we have this age of people building these massive telescopes. I was at the GA, Dr. Laura Ferragesi is part of a project where they're making a 30-meter telescope. You know, that's just unbelievably huge. It's like 144 segments or something to make this mirror work, and it's billions of dollars. And you know, here's Dr. Hickson saying, I'll do it for $500,000. Look at this. You know, so that's an interest. I mean, that's a complicated thing. One of the things I said, well, wait a minute, mercury, that's kind of toxic, isn't it? I said, you know what? Inside of an hour, it forms a surface of mercury oxide, and it stops out gas. Really? Okay.
Don't put your hand on that scope.
Don't touch it. Don't touch it. They have all kinds of protocols, you know, for going in there, working on it, starting it up, shutting it down, and it's shut down at this time of year. But
and it only points up at the sky. That's the only.
Oh yeah, it's like Mike's. It's like Mike's observatory. It points up and it tilts a little bit. You can't turn it sideways. It won't go. Big puddle on the floor. That won't work. But you can do these relatively cheaply. I mean, some of the people I spoke to, like Dr. Diener, who had the one in his house there, he started decades ago when you had to build the thing. There was no kits, you know, and there really wasn't much of an internet, and people were looking at articles and, you know, little handouts and trying to figure out how to make this stuff work. And he's a really good example of one of the pioneers that made this stuff work for himself. It's really amazing if you ever get a chance to see his rig down there. And he does absolutely amazing astrophotography. I walked into his office and he's got this wall of pictures that just, takes your breath away. But now, you know, there are multiple companies like Home and Dome, Sky Shed, Astro Gizmos, and on, they'll sell you a kit, you know, Astro closets. You know, little outhouse on your deck, slide it over to your telescope. You know, I mean, at that telescope you saw at the University of Victoria, outside they got a whole bunch of little pillars, and on the top is little Pez, they call them Pez dispensers. It's just a little lid that flips back and there's your telescope. Little 8-inch celestrons and 10 inches, all of it for the students. There's like 10 of them out there. You just flip the lid.
Is this like on the roof, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not a great, it's downtown Victoria, it's not a great viewing site. Like over there is the chemistry building with their stack of stacks sitting up, whatever it is sitting up, heat balloons, like can't look in that direction if it's running. But they're trying to make it accessible to students. They understand what they're doing right there. It's like the Southern Observatory in Vancouver, that like light pollution, yikes, it's no good. But people come in every Saturday at 8 o'clock and they can look at things you can see, you know. If you want to do something more elaborate, take some really good pictures, you want a dark sky site like Diener has down in Roberts Creek, but I mean, look at Kunihiko there in Tokyo, downtown Tokyo, he's got it on his deck. You can make it work. It's amazing the technology that's out there that you can actually make some of these conditions work for you.
To Bruce's question about the types of equipment and the cost, if you go on to Yahoo groups, the group that I work with, there's a whole lot of these observatories and there's a lot of smaller stuff there, which was the resource that I used when I was building mine. Now there'll soon be a new book, to see, thanks to Charles, added to so some of those pictures are quite familiar. But they've got sections there on Tupperware observatories. Large Tupperware garden sheds to observatories.
Yeah.
And there's an infinite variety of things.
One of the things that's starting to happen, one of the guys I was speaking to, he's in Washington State, and he wanted to buy a piece of dark sky property to build an observatory on. So he went and talked to a realtor and said, this is what I want the property for. He says, oh, really? I got an observatory for sale. I'm like, what? There is enough of them out there now that people are passing on, and here's this observatory, and who would like an observatory? I mean, people are going to the old folks' home, and there's their sky shed. You'll find them on the buy and sells and you know, Craigslist and whatever. You know? So, yeah. So, some of the groups that I spoke to, there's a Chicago youth group that has an observatory, and their first observatory was a used dome they got from somebody, carted off. So,
do you just slide back that roof?
yes.
And then you're remotely operating it from
the telescope's inside. We're going to have 2 laptops in there. And it's all, the wires run down through the pier and up into the walls.
Yeah.
And so...
you won't be on site, right?
Yeah, oh yeah, we'll be on site.
Oh, you will?
There is some talk about underneath the rail place putting a warm room in at some point.
Oh, yeah.
But for now, we're going to run it from inside of the observatory. And it's 12 foot square, so it's big enough we can get a few people.
Yeah.
And like I said, the deck out here, you can't quite see it, but there's another big pad in here that there's going to be a pillar on, so we can have another telescope outside for people. And that's a heavy-duty deck. We got planks like this, so that you can set up your small telescopes out there. And this is a nice viewing spot. Really, this is where we're going to be doing that thing on the 23rd. Hopefully, we'll have some clear weather. And if you want to go check out the website, here's the address. And there's some more intrepid people up at the observatory site beside the observatory. Very good.
That's fenced in, isn't it?
Yes.
The airport locked
Yes.
up.
The way that we have to do that, we're going to announce this is the time that we're opening the gate, and so people can all parade in. And if someone comes late, we'll have an arrangement. We'll see if we can put a combination lock on there, or we get someone to come down and let you in. But we'll announce the details of that shortly. Good.
Wonderful.
I built an 8-foot dome in Old Street.